Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast. And today's guest is Alice Dineen, who is the North American sales manager for Geotek Limited, who specialise in high resolution, non-destructive analysis of geological cores. For over 25 years, they've designed, built and supplied a range of multi-sensor core logger systems using a suite of geophysical and geochemical sensors primarily aimed at non-destructive core analysis across the mining industry. Alice has an earth science and geology degree and has been with the business for 5.5 years. And he's going to tell us a little bit more about the company, what they do, and also how mining companies can benefit from using their equipment and expertise. So that's welcome, Alice, to the podcast. How you doing, Alice?
Hi, Rob. Thank you so much for having me on. And I do understand that this is going to be probably slightly different to your usual podcast because I know that you interview a lot of juniors, a lot of majors. We're more in the tech side of things. So, seeing how core scanning, core logging can be applied specifically to the mining and mineral exploration market. So thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, no way. And as I'm obviously speaking off air, this podcast is really educational to our mining industry, and obviously your content will be relevant to many people and many of our listeners that work in the mining industry. So, before we get into the podcast, just wonder if you can tell the audience a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your career.
Yeah, great. Yeah, no problem there, Rob. I think I'll start off by giving a bit of an intro into myself and then sort of leading into an intro, I guess, into Geotek and what we do as a company, because it all kind of, I suppose, ties together. So just going into my interest in geology and how that all sparked. So that actually takes me back to quite a young age because when I was younger, both my parents actually worked in oil and gas. So I was born in the UK and then we actually traveled quite a bit, so always had a bug for traveling. So we tended to go between the Netherlands, Norway, and Texas, and kind of did that loop a couple of times. So I mean, growing up, I was around a lot of oil and gas personnel, but also a lot of people who were doing those same sort of routes and moving around. So I would say that travel itself was probably second nature to me, and just a normal thing to do. And then you combine that with, I was lucky enough to live in Stavanger for a few years. You combine that with some of the amazing landscapes and cultures. And, that's really where my interest in geology, I guess, sort of sparked. I mean, there's loads of hiking you can do around Stavanger, as you can imagine. A lot of metamorphic and igneous rocks over there. You have granites, gneisses, schists, all of that. So that's really where my interest in geology, I suppose, sparked, I would say. So then moving on to kind of later in life, I suppose, that really led me down the path of considering maybe I want to move into oil and gas and keep traveling as well. So that's really when I considered a degree in earth sciences. So I actually went to the University of Glasgow up in Scotland. And I don't know about you, Rob, but if you haven't been to Scotland, I mean, absolutely amazing geology. So, a lot of our field trips were right on the doorstep there. So absolutely fantastic. But of course, my degree kind of coincided with the downturn of oil and gas back in 2014. So I kind of had to consider my options a bit, what I might do. Do I want to still look into geology? Do I want to still look into oil and gas? Do I want to go down a different path? So that really, I suppose, led me to traveling a bit. So from there, I actually decided to take a bit of a break from geology and travel the world. So I traveled a lot of North America, South America, quite a bit of Asia, and then ended up in Australia for a bit, where I actually ended up working for a job in sales. So nothing to do with geology at that point. But that is when I actually realized I quite like the sort of company client relationship side of things. So the commercial aspect. And the reason I bring that up is that the role at Geotek, which originally sort of caught my eye, I suppose, was it was a hybrid role actually when I first joined, part geo, part in the sort of commercial aspect. So I'll circle back to that in a minute, but just to give you a bit of background into who Geotek are and what we actually do as a company. So Geotek essentially, like you said at the beginning there, Rob, specialise in the sort of design and manufacture of multi-sensor core logging systems. So we're basically creating platforms which automate the core logging process. So conventionally, you'd log the core visually, you'd have a geo stood there logging the core samples, but we actually create sensors and system parameters that allow you to automate that process. So we have our range of MSCL systems, we call them, multi-sensor core loggers. And then we have a range of imaging platforms as well, varying from visual imaging, UV imaging, hyperspectral imaging, and then also looking at X-ray CT as well. So 2D radiography of core samples, and then full 3D CT as well. So you get those lovely internal structures that you might not otherwise be able to see just from the naked eye. So circling back to my role at Geotek when I started, like I said, I was kind of half as a geo, half in a sort of commercial aspect. So I actually participated in quite a few of our core logging programs in which we use our sensor parameters and our core logging systems to log the core automatically. And this can be for a range of things, from physical properties through to geochemistry and, as I said, imaging. But if you go and look at our roots of Geotek, we were actually founded a few decades ago. We were founded, this will be our 30-year anniversary. We were founded in 1994 with our first system going out to the United States Geological Survey. And back then we were really focusing on the sort of physical parameters because our founder, Peter Schultheis, he had quite a strong connection and quite strong ties to the IODP, the International Ocean Discovery Program. So you can imagine physical properties being very important for shallow marine sediment cores. So back then we were very much focused on the physical property side of things. But I mean, we really wanted to broaden our horizons, and that really led us to exploring new markets. So we then started to work with a range of different reputable companies like Bartington. So we integrated magnetic susceptibility onto our systems, Olympus, or Evident, I should say actually now. So we integrate Avanta XRF onto our systems as well for elemental chemistry, Malvern Panalytical. So we integrate a lab spec for VNIR, so visual near infrared, and SWIR, so mineralogical data as well. So all of that combined has really, I suppose, opened us up into exploring new markets, whether it be on the geotechnical side of things, in oil and gas, looking at, sand, shale, siltstones, all of that. And then also, of course, into hard rock more recently, I would say in the last sort of 5 years or so, more hard rock geology, which obviously opened the door for mining and mineral exploration. So that really all kind of ties into where I am today, which is as the North American sales manager. So I essentially manage our sales and services for a lot of the US and Canada today. And I suppose we'll discuss that in further detail, Rob, as we go through this. But that really is essentially what got me to where I am today.
Yeah. Before we speak about Geotek, one question I was going to ask you from your introduction. Obviously, your parents were in oil and gas. What do they think about you going into the mining sector, or more focusing on the mining sector?
Oh, well, I mean, they of course love it because, oil and gas itself is a finite resource. I mean, you could almost argue that, anything in mining is a finite resource. But I think mining itself, mining is used in absolutely everything we do nowadays. So I think as an industry, it's going to be much more long-term than oil and gas, of course, but it's very much needed for that transition away from fossil fuels and into sort of greener energies. Because you think about mining and a lot of the components of mining, whether it be rare earth elements in wind turbines, for example, a lot of those feed into renewable resources and renewable energy practices that we can use to move away from fossil fuels, which we'll obviously need to do because like I say, it's a finite resource. So yeah, they're very happy with me being sort of more in the mining sector nowadays.
That's good. I wonder if you just give us some content obviously around core scanning, and why is core scanning even more important in the first place? And I suppose to many people that are listening, scanning I suppose is a relatively new concept, and I just wonder if you can just give us a bit of background around that.
Yeah, of course, Rob. So scanning, I mean, like I said, scanning has been, it was definitely a new concept, I would say, in the sort of early to mid 90s. It has been around for a while now, but I think it's much more in the last, like I say, 5 to 10 years or so that the sort of mineral exploration sector has really sort of started to embrace it. So I would definitely argue, and this is personal, and obviously it relates to my work as well, but I would definitely argue that core is the most important resource we have from an exploration standpoint and in the mining sector in general. It's a way of essentially connecting us to remote sensing surveys, geophysical surveys, aerial surveys, whatever it is that you're doing, is a way of connecting us to the subsurface. It's essentially the ground truthing that's there. So it's the material we test from, it's the material we can subsample from, it's the material we can, choose samples to send off for assay. In a lot of cases, we'll photograph the core, or you'd hope so at least, that we photograph the core sample. So it's essentially our key into understanding that underlying stratigraphy, and it's the thing that's telling us, how much gold is there, how much silver is there, how much nickel, tungsten, tin, whatever it is, whatever the commodity is a way of physically proving what is actually there. What is the resource? How economically viable is it? How much of it is there? How can we extract it? What's the sort of spatial distribution? All of these sort of features is a way of helping us understand and visualize what is actually there. So I guess that sort of underpins the question of really, how did core scanning even come about in the first place? Like I said, it's been around for kind of 2 to 3 decades or so now. But core itself is actually very, very expensive to extract, as I'm sure you, Rob, you're well aware, and many of the listeners, I'm sure, are very well aware. Core is very expensive to extract. So in that case, if you consider it that way, you might as well make the most out of that resource. You've already spent X amount of dollars, extracting the core sample. You might as well spend that little bit more trying to maximize the data value you can actually get from logging the core itself. So much of the time, core sits in, core repositories, or, sits on racks, sits on shelves. A lot of the time it's very underutilized. You might have logged the core, or you might have logged the core multiple times, which is actually a point I want to come back to later on. But and then it's stored and, either kind of forgotten about, discarded, or a lot of the time, I've seen core boxes outside when a core store is full, for example. And if you've worked with any of those cardboard boxes, you'll know if those things get wet, it's an absolute nightmare to bring them back out again and work with them. So I would say a lot of the time it's a very underutilized resource that we could do a lot more with. And I would say that's really where scanning sort of comes in and gives us the opportunity to really maximize that data value from the core, whether it be collecting a consistent data set, having a non-subjective data set, which is very important, and I do definitely want to come back to that point and discuss it in more detail, and then also creating a sort of golden standard, I suppose, if you'll pardon the pun, but a golden standard that you can sort of adhere to and come back to. So we really want to start looking at how we can maximize that resource, essentially.
So where does geotech fit into all of this in relation to mining and mineral exploration sector? And I just wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about some of the benefits in using this equipment and conventional logging techniques.
Yeah, of course, Rob. So where geotech essentially fits into the mining and sort of mineral exploration industry, I suppose, is with our BoxScan system. So I mentioned that we have a range of multi-sensor core loggers, but our BoxScan system we specifically designed for the mining and the exploration sectors. So with that, we've basically built a system that's ruggedized, plug and play electronics that can go to site, a built-in UPS, uninterrupted power supply, anti-vibration mounting, all of that considered so that we can, mobilize these things to really remote locations, which often a lot of exploration sites are in places, that are in the middle of nowhere, lacking infrastructure a lot of the time, or maybe even lacking an internet connection some of the time. So with that, we've also considered that in the software and built in offline capabilities so that you can do all of the core scanning offline. And then, of course, getting the system to site, you can pop the system on the back of a trailer if you wanted to, if there are roads to site. Or, even in some cases, we've actually helicoptered systems to site and basically built a sort of makeshift tent-style lab around the BoxScan itself so that we can actually, do the scanning on site as the core lands on deck next to the drill rig, for example. But a point I wanted to come back to there, Rob, just on this subject is what we can actually get from the core scanning itself, from the BoxScan. So I mentioned non-subjective data. And the reason I think that's so important is because a lot of the time you have a geologist, conventionally logging the core sample, so no core scanner. And, you might get a different interpretation to the next geologist who comes along and logs that same core sample. So you have a very subjective data set. It's the age-old saying of you have 10 different geologists, you're going to have 11 different interpretations. Because, it's just human nature, right? So I suppose core scanners are a way of us collecting a non-subjective data set. You can take measurements here, 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 and here, and collect a standard sort of set of measurements. You don't have a sampling bias. You don't have a geologist looking, oh wow, that's an amazing vein, I definitely want to log all about that, but not log a lot of the rest of the core sample. So you sort of remove the sampling bias. And then also on top of that, you have a consistent data set as well, and a data set that, because it's digitized on the core scanner, you can then refer back to. You don't have to then, have the next team come in and have, your supervisor not agree with any of the logging and then do the relogging all over again, which in many cases, and many people throughout the industry, whether it be juniors or majors, a lot of people I talk to have, logged and relogged the same set of core. And it's just such a waste of time and a waste of effort when you could, put these practices into the mine chain at an early stage, collect a digital data set, and then have that reliable, consistent data set that's non-subjective that you can then go back to. So with the BoxScan system, we've really focused on the sort of multi-parameter aspect. So we have a range of geochemistry sensors like XRF, RGB color, high-resolution imaging, all integrated onto the system, coupled with, we have magnetic susceptibility. And then we also have a point VNAR and SWIR sensor for your mineralogical data. So you're really getting quite a lot of data off of the system. And like I said, all non-subjectively. And what that essentially allows your geos to do, I suppose, is rather than being, I suppose, highly skilled data collectors, with conventional logging techniques, they're really more focused on the interpretation of the data coming off the system. So I would argue that it really sort of gives your geos the ability to actually do the geology rather than being those data collectors. So essentially what we're trying to do there with the BoxScan system, and I suppose core scanning systems as an industry in general, is we're trying to shorten the timeline from exploration through to production. This is for multiple reasons. A lot of the drivers for this are, of course, cost, because everyone wants to keep costs down in their projects. Understandably, you're trying to drive investment, particularly in the junior sphere. You're trying to drive investment all the time, to keep your project going and get to production as quickly as you can so that the mine can actually start, being profitable. So what we want to do with core scanners in the case of exploration is really sort of shorten that timeline. So you look at the Lassonde curve, for example, and you typically have a junior making the discovery, and then what you want to do is essentially drill to ore as quickly as you can. So you want to characterize the resource. You want to understand how much resource is there, how economically viable it is. So what we can do by employing core scanning technology at an early stage is actually ground truth and understand and characterize that resource at a faster rate, so that by the time you move into your sort of feasibility studies, you already have a lot of what's there, and hopefully you can do, less lab testing, less assaying, less costs throughout your feasibility. So again, shortening the timeline, so less cost, better characterizing your resource, at an early stage. So again, less cost. And then making models and feeding all this info into your models, whether it be your geometrical models, your geological models, all of that information at an early stage really gives us the ability, I suppose, to sort of bridge that gap and propel us towards production. So I'd like to actually at this point touch upon a case study we did with Xanadu Mines. And the reason I wanted to talk about Xanadu Mines is because they were actually our first BoxScan client. So they've had BoxScans on site for quite a number of years now. They have a copper gold porphyry over in Mongolia at their Kamagtai project. And what they're wanting to do is scan their entire core archive, so all the core they've collected up until that point, and then also their new core that's landing on deck. So they're essentially using BoxScan to collect a high-resolution data set automatically from the core sample, so essentially freeing the geo to do the geological interpretation. So what that also does as well is, because you're just using one system to collect all of these measurement data, you're actually freeing up a lot of time as well. So you don't have one person doing the imaging, one person, taking the mag sus measurement. You don't have one person going around with an XRF, collecting XRF. And then on top of that, compiling all of that data and trying to marry it all up and make some sort of sense out of it. You have all of that already, all depth co-registered on one system. So with that, again, a consistent data set and a data set that you can then feed into your block models. So for example, Xanadu are using Leapfrog. So they're feeding all the data basically straight into their Leapfrog models. And then we're actually going one step further with Xanadu, and we're looking at a sort of, I suppose, a machine learning sort of component, taking the data sets, plugging them into basically purposefully built machine learning algorithms. And I'll go into a bit more detail about this. But essentially using that to characterize and segment their sulfides and actually work out how much sulfide is there. So I suppose as a commodity-driven industry, by embracing and this sort of enhanced analysis, we can really sort of propel ourselves through from the exploration phase to production at a much faster rate. And that's really what we're trying to achieve. But, as an industry on the whole, particularly for meeting green energy targets further down the line, I think it's really important for us to sort of look into, a variety of innovative technology and see what can really be applied here, and how can we propel the industry forward so that we can move through this sort of green energy transition.
Yeah, and obviously talking about machine learning, I just wondered if you can expand on what you're doing with AI currently, and obviously how this applies with to the BoxScan, and I suppose how juniors or even majors in the exploration space could look to apply this.
Yeah, well, I mean, AI, it's such a hot topic right now, right? I mean, AI encompasses all, I suppose, artificial intelligence, whether it be deep learning, machine learning, because that in itself, actually, machine learning has been around in industry. I know in the oil and gas industry, but even in the mining industry as well for quite a number of years. It's really just LLMs like ChatGPT, I suppose, that have really brought the sort of the public awareness to the sort of AI world, I suppose. But I mean, many companies in the geoscience sector have been looking into machine learning algorithms for a number of years, and ourselves included. And we've really sort of tried to expand on this and try to, I suppose, incorporate a component of AI into all of our core logging systems, particularly the BoxScan system, so that we can see if we can achieve results at a faster rate and see if we can achieve things that we didn't otherwise think we could without the means of machine learning. So I'll circle back to the case of Xanadu Mines just to go into that a bit deeper and sort of explain to you of one of the techniques we're using machine learning for. And so with that, I just want to mention Reza Randan and James Shreve, who've been working very closely with our client Xanadu for the machine learning for our segmentation, essentially, of sulfides. So essentially what we're doing there is we're approaching from a supervised learning sort of approach to extract sulfides from high-resolution core images themselves. So we're using the high-resolution line scan camera on the BoxScan, so we can do wet and dry images on the BoxScan. We're using those line scan data to automatically segment sulfides. Now, of course, there are many challenges with this. Trying to segment sulfides in itself just visually can be very challenging. As a geo, I would know, trying to log the core, but even through the images themselves. So what we're looking to do is segment the sulfides, as in understand how much sulfide is there, and then also differentiate between the different types of sulfides. So, that could be disseminated, it could be massive, it could be vein sulfides. So we really want to understand the sort of spatial distribution of those sulfides as well. So with that, we looked at different clustering approaches, and then we looked and sort of settled eventually on k-means clustering. So as I said, there are quite a few challenges with this, one being the different types of sulfides, which I mentioned, the different ways they actually appear within the core sample, and how we go about sort of understanding what's actually there. So what we did was we basically generated a workflow of different models. So we trained the model to identify lithology types themselves. So that was the first model. We used the data from the BoxScan and identified different lithologies. Then we looked at the lithologies containing sulfides themselves. So we honed in on those specific lithologies and fed those through an additional model to then start to look at the sulfide content. And what we found was it actually worked pretty well. It's not robust by any means. I think we're still in the sort of early stages, but it actually worked pretty well in that we were able to not only identify total sulfide content, but actually start to segment the sulfides out themselves. And how we did this, so for example, how we differentiated between disseminated versus veined versus massive sulfides, is we started to look at the sulfide particles themselves and the different characteristics, whether it be, roundness, elongation, and started to create polygons and classify them and group them into different types of sulfides. And from that, we could get different sulfide segmentation, essentially. And so we could do this for one image, but then we decided to apply this to quite a large data set. I think the initial data set was 30 kilometers, I want to say, off the top of my head. But even if you just apply this to, let's just take one borehole as an example, you come up with a segmented sulfide image, so a sulfide map, we call them, with lithological predictions and then total sulfide content prediction. And then you can, of course, you can compare this to the assay data or the XRF data, looking at this total sulfur content. And we actually found that the correlation flowed quite nicely and it was very similar. Of course, there's going to be some scatter, there's going to be some differentiation there because assay results are obviously volumetric, whereas we're just looking at the surface of the core. So, if you have what appears to be a small vein on the surface of the core, but underneath is actually a very large vein, we wouldn't capture that necessarily because we're just looking at the surface. So there are going to be slight differentiations, but on the whole, the trend actually followed really nicely. So this actually enabled us to sort of look at rolling this out with all of our BoxScan systems, along with other machine learning algorithms that we're looking at for other sort of AI components, I'll say. But it's a really interesting case study, and I think it sort of opens the doorways to what we can really do in the sort of AI and machine learning sector. And I think the industry as a whole can definitely benefit on the AI side of things, but that's just something that we're looking into at the moment and hoping to roll out more as standard in the future with our BoxScan systems.
Have you run into sort of any challenges with big data? Essentially, what are the issues, if any, with large data files? And is there any, I suppose, way around this? Do you think this will be an industry-wide problem?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do agree with what you actually said there, Rob. Do I think it will be an industry-wide problem? Yes and no. I definitely do think there are issues, particularly at the moment, with high resolution data collection. I mean, if you're imaging, for example, high resolution hyperspectral images, I mean, those files can be massive. There are, of course, ways around it. So, for example, hyperspectral, we look at very high resolution mineralogical data. You're collecting basically a mineral map, and you're collecting mineral classifications and abundances from the core sample using visual near infrared and short wavelength infrared. A way around it that we have found is, rather than collecting a near continuous data set like hyperspectral, we actually collect mineralogical data on the BoxScan as point data. So rather than creating a really high resolution hyperspectral image, which, don't get me wrong, can be very, very valuable in certain deposit types, but I definitely don't think it's needed in all deposit types, and definitely not at the very early stages of exploration. But what we do is integrate a point sensor. As I mentioned previously, we work with Malvern Panalytical, so we integrate one of their lab specs. So we're collecting point sensor data rather than a full hyperspectral image. So that really brings down, I suppose, the file sizes, because you have that mineralogical data and you can compare that to other data in the BoxScan system, like the XRF, like the MagSAS, like the color data, and then start to really get a good geological understanding from the sort of multi-parametric data approach. Whereas hyperspectral imaging can be massive file sizes. And if you're working with any cloud-based software, I'm sure you're well aware of how long it can take to upload to the cloud, particularly if you don't have a very good internet connection on site. It can be a real problem there. And then, of course, you have large file sizes that you're trying to share, in many cases, particularly with majors, internationally, because you might have a team in Canada processing the data from, a mine in South Africa, for all you know. So I think that sort of international and global approach that a lot of companies now have really opens the door to, we need data which we can not only work with, but that's reasonable file sizes, easy to access, and then also easy to understand and actually get your teeth into, because there's really no point in collecting all of this data and then having extremely large file sizes that you're having to store either on hard drives or in the cloud, and not doing anything with it. So I think as an industry, as a whole, I think we definitely need to get better at dealing with data, I suppose. We definitely need more geodata scientists coming into the industry. And I mean, that's a little bit of a concern at the moment, because I know that we really need more geos coming in, or more people, I should say, more young people doing geoscience degrees, because at the moment I really think that's needed for us to sort of meet our targets for the green energy transition. But I would say data science in general is something that really we need to, as an industry, get better at. And I think large file sizes can definitely be an issue, but there's definitely workarounds for it, I would say.
And lastly, and concluding, obviously you mentioned the green transition a few times. How do you think applying core scanning to exploration programs and obviously mine sites can help with the green energy transition?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, Rob, and I think it's one that personally I'm very interested in, because I'm very passionate about this transition and seeing how we can globally, not only just as an industry, propel ourselves forward. So I mean, there's a lot of forward thinking out there at the moment. So for example, you have critical minerals. I mean, how do you even class what a critical mineral is, right? A resource that's essential, is it? A resource that's economically essential, which of course can change from region to region, let alone year by year. So I think there's a lot now in the way of critical mineral initiatives, which is great to see. It's great to see, governments sort of giving incentives for these sort of critical mineral initiatives and critical mineral programs, which I think is very, very important, because of course, from an investor perspective, there's always a cost element at play, completely understandably. But of course, to move through this green energy transition, we really need to be aware of the targets that need to be met, and the tech, I suppose, as well, that's out there that can help us reach those targets, and reach those targets at a quicker rate. I mean, you look at ESG credits as well. There's great incentive there for better understanding the resource and geology. You look at things like mine reclamation. You can use all of this innovative tech in that sort of way, looking at how can we better make use of the space that we've been mining for X amount of years. And then, of course, you can look at things like carbon capture storage as well. So, of course, core logging or core scanning, I should say, can be hugely beneficial in the carbon capture storage sector, because you're wanting to characterize rocks which might be suitable hosts for carbon. So I think core scanning can definitely have an impact on the green energy transition, and in fact I would probably argue that it's paramount and something that's really needed in this transition. And I think one of the key things there, just to kind of summarize, Rob, is and something that I feel strongly about is public awareness. And I think public awareness, much of the time when you think about mining, and people almost consider it a dirty word, unfortunately, and I do understand why, because as an industry on the whole, you go back however many years, and there were a lot of practices which weren't necessarily or wouldn't necessarily meet our ESG standards of today, let's say. So it is understandable, but I do definitely think we need to change that sort of public perception of mining, so that we can not only get more geos actually coming into the industry, or data scientists to use this data and help us achieve our targets, but also to increase education. So I think even putting things like renewable energies, mining, mineral exploration, all of that into school curriculums and things as well, I think would be hugely beneficial. You start teaching about that at a young age, and then you see all of those, not all, but you'd hope that some of those kids go on to geoscience degrees or degrees in data science and actually help with that transition. So so I think core scanning in general, I think, can be hugely beneficial for the green energy transition, and I would hope it is moving forward. I know that I've seen some absolutely fantastic case studies coming off the BoxScan, and I would hope that we have more and we can really help the industry as a whole.
Yeah, Alice, really appreciate your time. Thank you for obviously give us a company overview of Geotek, and obviously tell us a little bit about obviously the core scanning systems that you use. I'd imagine a lot of our audience would be very interested, obviously, in what you had to say. I know I have a lot of junior miners on this podcast, and I know a lot of them do listen to this. So if they want to find out any more information from yourself, I know you're at many conferences around the world, and obviously they can come up and obviously approach you if they do see you there. But if our audience wants to reach out to you, want to follow your story, want to know a little bit more about Geotek, how can they go about doing that? What social media platform channels do you occupy?
Yeah, so they can definitely email me or hit me up on LinkedIn. So my email is just alice@geotek.co.uk, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Alice Dineen. I'm on LinkedIn all the time, so that's probably the best way to get me, is to message me on LinkedIn. But of course, you're welcome to email me. We do have a Geotek LinkedIn as well, which you're more than happy to get in touch with, or you can get in touch with our general email, which is sales@geotek.co.uk. I will be attending some of the upcoming conferences. I'll be at the SME this year, which is next week, and of course PDAC in a couple of weeks' time. So if any of your listeners are interested, Rob, they're more than welcome to come find me there as well.
Yes, certainly. And we'll include all those in the show notes, all those links, so they can get easy access to get in contact with you. And like I said, you're at many of the conferences around the world over the course of the year. So no doubt any of our listeners that are attending anywhere around the world, attending some of these conferences, no doubt they'll be able to obviously meet up with you whilst at the event.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, no worries. Well, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that episode. As always, this is very obviously educational, especially within the not necessarily, I suppose, just in the junior market, but with even larger mining companies. And as Alice alluded to, obviously core samples are obviously collected and need to be obviously scanned. Need a lot more information. And obviously collecting that data. And I think Alice just demonstrated why Geotek are a company that you should consider in your exploration programs. So if you've obviously got any questions, please reach out to Alice. Also, appreciate your continued support with this podcast. Please share this far and wide. Wherever you are in the world, please share the episode to any people within the mining industry all across the world. And really, like I said, really appreciate your continued support. So until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.